Some people leave behind legacies. These people left behind punchlines. Today, we're diving into the most hilariously stupid, absurdly tragic, and straight-up unbelievable ways historical figures have exited the stage. Not with a bang, not even with a whimper. More like a historical faceplant in front of a live audience. 1. Let's kick things off in the world of corporate law, which is usually boring unless a guy named Gary Hoy is involved. In 1993, Hoy, a senior partner at his Toronto firm, wanted to prove to some students that the windows of his 24th floor office were unbreakable. His method of demonstration? Taking a full-speed running start and body-checking the glass. He had done this stunt before, and the glass held firm. But on this fateful day, while the glass pane itself didn't shatter, the entire window frame popped out of the building. Gary sailed through the air, proving his point about the glass while simultaneously disproving his theory about surviving a 24-story fall. It's a textbook case of winning the argument but losing absolutely everything else in the most spectacular way imaginable. 2. In 1912, a tailor from Austria named Franz Reichelt was convinced he was the next Leonardo da Vinci. His masterpiece wasn't a painting, but a wearable parachute that looked suspiciously like a ridiculously heavy coat. To prove his genius, he secured permission to test it by jumping off the first deck of the Eiffel Tower. Everyone, from friends to the police, begged him to use a dummy. But Franz, craving glory, insisted on being his own test pilot. He stood on the edge, hesitated for a moment, and then leaped into history. His invention immediately failed, wrapping around him like a shroud as he plummeted straight down, leaving a small crater in the frozen ground. He became famous, just not in the way he'd planned. The press gave him a fitting nickname, the Flying Tailor. 3. Before anesthesia, surgery was a brutal, high-speed horror show, and Dr. Robert Liston was the undisputed rock star of the operating theater. He was famous for his lightning-fast amputations, a skill that was great for the patient's consciousness, but, as it turns out, terrible for everyone else in the room. During one of his signature speedy leg removals, his blade was moving so furiously that he accidentally sliced off the fingers of his young assistant. If that wasn't enough, in his wild backswing, he also clipped the coat of an elderly spectator, who was so frightened he dropped dead from a heart attack. The patient and the assistant later died of gangrene. That's one patient, one assistant, and one spectator, all gone in a single operation. It proudly holds the record as the only surgery in history with a 300% mortality rate. 4. Bobby Leach was a true man of courage, a daredevil who cemented his legend in 1911 by becoming only the second person to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel and live to tell the tale. This guy stared into the watery abyss and spat in its eye. He survived a stunt that was basically a wooden coffin being thrown off a cliff. He toured the world, basking in the glory of cheating death. So, what epic challenge finally claimed the life of this fearless adrenaline junkie? A mountain climb? A shark fight? Nope. It was a stray piece of fruit. Years later, while strolling down a street in New Zealand, he slipped on an orange peel. The fall resulted in a compound fracture of his leg, which developed gangrene. He died from complications following the amputation. He conquered Niagara Falls only to be taken out by litter. 5. Allow me to present Clement Vallandigham, a lawyer who took the concept of a killer argument a bit too literally. In 1871, he was defending a man accused of murder in a bar fight. Vallandigham's entire case hinged on the idea that the victim had accidentally shot himself while trying to draw his own pistol from his pocket. To demonstrate this plausible scenario to his co-counsel in his hotel room, he grabbed a pistol he thought was unloaded to reenact the moment. He showed how the gun could have snagged and fired. And in a moment of tragic accuracy, the pistol, which did have one bullet in it, went off, shooting him in the stomach. He died the next day, but his demonstration was so convincing that his client was acquitted. He posthumously won his case, which is probably the most bittersweet legal victory of all time. 6. You've probably heard of Jack Daniel, the founder of the famous Tennessee whiskey. He created a spirit known for its smooth character, but his own final years were anything but. One morning, the notoriously short-tempered Jack arrived at his office and couldn't remember the combination to his safe. We've all been there, that moment of pure frustration. But instead of calling a locksmith, Jack let his anger take over and delivered a furious kick to the stubborn metal box. The blow broke his big toe. Over time, a nasty infection set in, which developed into gangrene, eventually leading to his death years later. The man built an empire on patience and craftsmanship, yet he died because of a temper tantrum with his own office furniture. It's the ultimate lesson in why you should never get into a fight with a heavyweight object. 7. Some monarchs are remembered for their wisdom or military prowess. King Adolf Frederick of Sweden is remembered for his appetite. In 1771, on one fateful Tuesday, the king sat down for a meal that can only be described as a culinary marathon. He consumed lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, smoked herring, and copious amounts of champagne. That was just the main course. For dessert, he moved on to his absolute favorite treat, a pastry called a semla, which is a sweet bun filled with almond paste and cream, served in a bowl of hot milk. He devoured not one, not two, but 14 of them. His digestive system, having been subjected to this royal onslaught, promptly waved the white flag of surrender. He died that evening, earning the eternal title of the king who ate himself to death. A truly epic way to go. 8. In ancient Greece, the Stoics were philosophers who preached logic and the mastery of emotion. One of its leading figures was a man named Chrysippus, a brilliant mind who wrote hundreds of books. However, his exit from the world was less than stoic. The story goes that he saw a donkey eating figs from his tree. Finding this hilarious, he turned to his slave and joked, "Now give the donkey a drink of pure wine to wash down the figs." Apparently, this was the height of 3rd century BC comedy. Chrysippus found his own joke so utterly, overwhelmingly funny that he broke into a fit of laughter so violent he literally died. A philosopher dedicated to emotional control, taken out by his own punchline. It just proves that no matter how logical you are, a sufficiently dumb joke can still be your undoing. 9. Imagine being the mayor of a small Swiss town and deciding to hold a press conference. What's the topic? Public safety, of course. You're probably standing there talking about sensible shoes or looking both ways before you cross the street. Now, imagine that during this very press conference, a large, inflatable exercise ball, which someone inexplicably left near an open window in the office above, falls directly onto your head. This is the tragically comedic story of Monica Meyer, the mayor of Betz, Switzerland. She was killed instantly. The universe has a dark sense of humor, but it's hard to imagine a more perfectly timed, ironic, and utterly ridiculous demonstration of the fact that danger can literally fall from the sky when you're busy talking about how to avoid it. 10. King Martin of Aragon, who ruled in the 15th century, met an end so bizarre it sounds like a 2-act play. Act 1. Gluttony. The king, known for his hearty appetite, single-handedly devoured an entire goose for dinner. This led to a severe case of indigestion, leaving him bedridden and in agony. Act 2. Comedy. To cheer him up, his favorite court jester was brought in. The jester told a joke about a deer he saw in the woods, hanging by its tail from a fig tree, as if it had been punished for stealing figs. The king, even in his pained state, found this image so astronomically funny that he erupted into a fit of uncontrollable laughter that lasted for hours. The combination of indigestion and relentless hysterics was too much for his body, and he died. A fatal 1-2 punch of goose and joke. 11. Alan Pinkerton was a legend. He was the founder of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, a man who foiled an assassination plot against Abraham Lincoln and whose agents hunted down infamous outlaws like Jesse James. His name was synonymous with toughness, intelligence, and danger. So how did this titan of detective work meet his end? Was it a shootout? A clever poison plot by a rival? No. He was taking a casual stroll down a Chicago sidewalk, slipped, and bit his tongue. That's it. A simple, clumsy accident. But the bite became infected, gangrene set in, and the man who stared down America's most wanted criminals died because he couldn't stick the landing on a patch of pavement. His agency's motto was, "We never sleep," but a moment of inattention put him to rest for good. 12. Isadora Duncan was a revolutionary dancer, a global icon of free expression whose performances were defined by flowing movements and long, beautiful silk scarves. Her art and her fashion were inseparable. In 1927, she was riding in an open-top convertible in Nice, France. As the car began to move, her massive hand-painted scarf, a signature part of her look, billowed behind her dramatically. But it billowed a bit too dramatically, catching in the spokes of the rear wheel and yanking her from the car with incredible force, breaking her neck instantly. Her final words to her friends just moments before were, "Farewell, my friends, I go to glory." She was right, but it was a much faster and more brutal trip than anyone had anticipated. Her greatest fashion statement became her own tragic, instant executioner. 13. Jean-Baptiste Lully was a composer in the court of France's King Louis XIV, and he was a man who took his music very seriously. Back in the 17th century, conductors didn't use a delicate little baton. They used a massive wooden staff, which they would slam on the floor to keep time for the orchestra. During a performance of one of his own compositions, Lully, filled with passion and artistic fervor, missed the floor and slammed the heavy staff directly onto his foot, piercing the skin. The wound developed gangrene. Doctors recommended amputating his leg to save his life, but Lully, also a dancer, refused, vanity triumphing over reason. He couldn't bear the thought of not being able to dance. As a result, the infection spread, and he died a slow, painful death caused by conducting his own music too aggressively. 14. Aeschylus, one of the great playwrights of ancient Greece, is considered the father of tragedy. It is therefore fitting that his own death was so tragically absurd, it sounds like a discarded plot from a Monty Python sketch. An oracle had once prophesied that he would be killed by a falling object. Taking this very seriously, Aeschylus spent most of his time outdoors in open fields, far from any buildings or trees. But he failed to account for the ingenuity of both fate and birds of prey. An eagle, having caught a tortoise for lunch, was looking for a rock upon which to drop it and crack its shell. Spotting what it thought was a perfect, shiny, bald rock from high above, the eagle released its payload. That rock was Aeschylus's head. He died instantly, fulfilling the prophecy in the most bizarre way imaginable. 15. In 1841, William Henry Harrison became the 9th President of the United States. At 68, he was the oldest person to take office at the time and was eager to prove he was still a tough, vigorous war hero. To project this image, he decided to deliver his inaugural address on a bitterly cold and wet March day without wearing a coat, hat, or gloves. He then proceeded to give the longest inaugural speech in American history, droning on for nearly 2 hours. The speech was a spectacular display of endurance, but it came at a price. He developed a severe cold, which quickly turned into pneumonia and pleurisy. Exactly 1 month to the day after taking office, he was dead. His stubborn attempt to look strong resulted in the shortest presidency in U.S. history. He literally talked himself to death. 16. Being a poet can be a tough gig, but it's not usually a fatal one. Unless you are Tadeusz Myszynski, a Polish poet, and you have a really nice coat. In 1918, while traveling through a rural part of Russia during the chaos of the revolution, Myszynski was set upon by a group of terrified and angry peasants. They weren't angry at him for his poetry. They were angry at him because, seeing his fine, expensive-looking overcoat, they assumed he was a government tax collector coming to take what little they had. So, in a tragic case of mistaken identity fueled by fashion, they killed him with an axe. It's a grim reminder that sometimes it doesn't matter what's in your head. What matters is what's on your back. And being overdressed can occasionally be a capital offense. 17. Let's talk about a classic case of instant karma, served piping hot. Paralysis of Athens was a bronze worker in the 6th century BC with a truly twisted entrepreneurial spirit. He designed a gruesome new torture device for Phalaris, the tyrannical ruler of Acragas. It was a hollow bronze bull, life-sized, with a door on the side. The victim would be locked inside, and a fire would be lit underneath. As the person was slowly roasted alive, their screams would travel through a system of tubes and pipes, emerging from the bull's mouth as a sound that supposedly resembled the bellowing of an angry bull. Phalaris was impressed by the ingenuity but disgusted by the cruelty of its creator. So, for the maiden voyage of this metallic nightmare, he chose the perfect first victim, Perilos himself. They roasted him inside his own invention, though he was pulled out just before he died so he could be finished off by being thrown from a cliff. 18. We've all had those days where it feels like the universe is conspiring against us. For João Maria de Souza, a man living in Brazil, this wasn't just a feeling. It was a literal, bovine reality. In 2013, he was fast asleep in his bed next to his wife when a 1.5-ton cow, which had escaped from a nearby farm and wandered onto the hill behind his house, stepped onto his fragile asbestos roof. The roof gave way, and the cow plummeted about 8 feet, landing directly on top of the sleeping Mr. de Souza. His wife, who was on the other side of the bed, was unharmed, as was the cow. But Mr. de Souza died from internal bleeding while waiting for medical attention. It's a freak accident of such epic improbability that it feels less like a real event and more like a warning from a very strange insurance commercial. 19. Jerome Irving. Rodale was a pioneer of the organic food movement in America. He spent his life passionately advocating for healthy eating, natural farming, and avoiding pesticides and additives. He was a true guru of wellness, and he was supremely confident in his lifestyle. In 1971, during a taping of the Dick Cavett Show, he gave a glowing interview about his health regimen. Shortly after, while another guest was being interviewed, the 72-year-old Rodale, who had just boasted, "I'm in such good health that I fell down a long flight of stairs yesterday and I laughed all the way," and had also claimed he would live to be 100, suddenly slumped over in his chair. He had suffered a massive, fatal heart attack right there on live television. It was, without a doubt, the most tragically ironic and poorly timed product endorsement in the history of healthy living. 20. Speaking of health fanatics, let's meet Basil Brown, a man who took the phrase, "you are what you eat," to its absolute fatal conclusion. In 1974, Brown became obsessed with the supposed health benefits of carrots. He believed they were a miracle food, a cure-all for everything. So he went on an extreme carrot juice diet. And by extreme, I mean he was drinking a gallon of carrot juice every single day. That's about the equivalent of 48 carrots, juiced, daily. Unsurprisingly, his skin turned a vibrant, almost radioactive shade of orange. But the cosmetic effects were the least of his worries. He had consumed so much vitamin A that his liver failed completely. He died of cirrhosis, a condition usually associated with severe alcoholism, proving that you can, in fact, have too much of a good thing, especially when that good thing turns you into a human traffic cone. 21. Tycho Brahe was a brilliant but eccentric 16th-century Danish astronomer whose meticulous observations laid the groundwork for Kepler's laws of planetary motion. He was a giant of science. He also had a famously prosthetic nose made of brass after losing his real one in a duel over a math equation. But his death was even more bizarre than his nose. While attending a lavish banquet in Prague, Brahe found himself in a difficult social situation. He desperately needed to use the restroom, but etiquette of the time dictated that it was a grave insult to leave the table before the host. Being a nobleman of strict principles, he refused to excuse himself. He sat through the entire feast in agony, literally holding it in for hours. This decision led to a bladder infection, or, as some legends claim, a full-on rupture of his bladder. He died in excruciating pain 11 days later. 22. Zeno of Citium was the founder of the Stoic school of philosophy, the very same school that taught emotional resilience and acceptance of fate. He lived a long and disciplined life, preaching that one should not be controlled by pleasure or pain. One day, as the elderly Zeno was leaving his school, he tripped and fell, breaking his toe. For most people, this would be a painful annoyance. For Zeno, it was a cosmic message. He looked down at his broken digit, then dramatically struck the ground with his fist and quoted a line from a Greek play. I come, why dost thou call for me? He interpreted this minor, clumsy accident as a sign from the universe that his time on Earth was over. So he went home and, in a final act of ultimate Stoic control, held his breath until he died. He didn't just accept fate, he met it halfway over a stubbed toe. 23. The phrase, "the show must go on," has been the mantra of actors for centuries. But perhaps no one took it more literally or to a more fatal conclusion than the legendary French playwright Molière. In 1673, he was starring in the lead role of his own play, titled, with crushing irony, Le Malade Imaginaire, or The Imaginary Invalid. The play is a comedy about a hypochondriac. During the final performance, Molière, who was genuinely suffering from pulmonary tuberculosis, was overcome by a violent coughing fit on stage. He managed to finish the performance, but collapsed shortly after the final curtain and died a few hours later. The audience, witnessing his very real agony, simply thought he was giving a brilliantly convincing performance as a man pretending to be sick. He died playing a character who was faking a fatal illness, while he himself was actually fatally ill. 24. Sigurd the Mighty was a formidable 9th-century Norse earl who conquered large parts of northern Scotland. He was a quintessential Viking, fierce, ambitious, and brutal. After defeating one of his most troublesome enemies, Maelbrigte the Buck-toothed, Sigurd decided to make an example of him. He beheaded Maelbrigte and, as a show of dominance, strapped the severed head to his saddle as a trophy. As he rode triumphantly home, the bouncing head of his vanquished foe enacted its posthumous revenge. The prominent buck teeth for which Maelbrigte was named scraped against Sigurd's leg, creating a small cut. The wound became infected, and Sigurd the Mighty died from the infection shortly after. He won the battle but lost the war to the ghost bite of a dead man's dental work. 25. Royal protocol can be a tricky and sometimes deadly business. Take the tragic case of Sunanda Kumariratana, a beloved queen consort of Siam, modern-day Thailand, in the 19th century. In 1880, the pregnant queen and her daughter were on their way to a summer palace. Their royal barge was being towed by a larger boat across a river when it suddenly capsized. The queen and princess were thrown into the water, right in front of their many attendants and guards. Yet no one moved to help them. Why? Because a strict ancient law forbade any commoner from touching a member of the royal family. The punishment for doing so was death. The guards and servants, paralyzed by tradition, simply watched as their queen and princess drowned. The law intended to protect the sacredness of the royals ended up being the very instrument of their demise. 26. Li Bai is one of China's most celebrated poets, a master of romanticism and a lover of nature, beauty, and perhaps most of all, wine. His poetry is filled with vivid imagery, often revolving around the moon. One fateful night in 762, the poet was on a boat trip on the Yangtze River, doing what he did best, drinking and composing verses. According to the popular legend, he was particularly deep in his cups when he saw the beautiful reflection of the full moon shimmering on the water's surface. In a moment of drunken poetic ecstasy, he decided he must embrace the moon. So he leaned over the side of the boat, reached out to hug the watery reflection, lost his balance, and promptly fell in and drowned. He died trying to physically grasp a dream, a perfectly poetic, if incredibly foolish end for a man who lived his life in a state of romantic intoxication. 27. Attila the Hun. The name itself conjures images of terror and destruction. He was the scourge of God, a warlord who carved out a massive empire through pure brutality and fear, making Rome itself tremble. His death, you would assume, came in a glorious, epic battle, right? Wrong. In 453 AD, Attila celebrated his latest marriage to a young bride named Ildiko. He partied hard, as a fearsome warlord is wont to do, indulging in a massive feast with heavy drinking. He retired to his wedding chamber, and the next morning, when he failed to appear, his concerned guards broke down the door. They found his new bride weeping over his dead body. There was no sign of a struggle, no wound. Attila the Hun, the terror of Europe, had suffered a massive nosebleed in his drunken sleep, choked on his own blood, and died ignominiously in his wedding bed. 28. Tennessee Williams was one of the greatest American playwrights of the 20th century, a master of depicting complex human psychology and tragedy. His own death, however, felt less like a profound tragedy and more like a bizarre, preventable accident. Williams had a daily routine that involved using eye drops, and to get the drops in, he would hold the small plastic cap from the bottle in his mouth. One night in 1983, in his New York City hotel room, this habit turned fatal. It's believed that while tilting his head back to administer the drops, he accidentally inhaled and swallowed the cap, which became lodged in his windpipe, causing him to suffocate. The man who wrote such iconic lines of drama and despair was ultimately undone by a tiny piece of plastic. It was a mundane, almost silly end for a life dedicated to exploring the grand, complex agonies of the human condition. 29. Empedocles was a pre-Socratic Greek philosopher who believed he was more than just a man. He was a divine being, a god in mortal form, and he needed his followers to believe it too. To provide the ultimate proof of his immortality and secure his legacy, he devised a plan that was as dramatic as it was idiotic. Around 430 BC, he traveled to Mount Etna, an active volcano in Sicily. In front of a crowd of his disciples, he delivered a final speech and then heroically leaped into the fiery crater, expecting to be consumed and thereby ascend to the heavens. His followers were left stunned, presumably convinced of his divinity. That is, until the volcano, in a final act of geological critique, later spat out one of his scorched bronze sandals, providing rather conclusive evidence that Empedocles was, in fact, very mortal. 30. The annals of bizarre royal deaths are extensive, but few are as weirdly specific as the alleged demise of King Theobald I of Navarre. In the 13th century, during one of the Crusades, Theobald was campaigning in the Holy Land. The story, which is likely more legend than fact but is too good not to tell, claims that the king was resting under a palm tree. At that moment, a monkey, high up in the fronds, dislodged a coconut. This coconut then fell with pinpoint accuracy, striking the king directly on the head and killing him. While historians doubt the story's veracity, it has persisted for centuries purely because of its magnificent absurdity. The idea of a crusading king, a noble warrior of Christendom, being taken out not by a Saracen blade but by a piece of fruit deployed by a mischievous primate, is the kind of historical footnote that's just too perfect to forget. 31. Life imitating art is a common trope, but for British actor Gareth Jones, it became a terrifying reality on live television in 1958. He was performing in a play called Underground, broadcast live from the BBC studios. In the play, his character was scripted to suffer a massive, fatal heart attack during a particularly tense scene. As the cameras rolled and the nation watched, Jones clutched his chest and collapsed, delivering a performance of startling realism. His fellow actors, assuming he was just giving the performance of his life, continued with their lines. But Jones wasn't acting. He had suffered a genuine fatal heart attack at the exact moment his character was supposed to. He died on the studio floor, leaving the cast and crew to realize the horror only after the scene had ended. 32. You don't often associate cheese with deadly riots, but in Nottingham, England in 1766, the two went hand in hand. A food shortage had caused the price of cheese and other staples to skyrocket, leading to widespread anger. The tipping point came during the Nottingham Goose Fair, when hungry and enraged townspeople began seizing cheese from merchants. This escalated into what is now known as the Great Cheese Riot. During the chaos, rioters looted a shop and rolled a massive heavy wheel of cheese down a hill. Unfortunately, a local alderman named William Cuxon, who was trying to restore order, was directly in the path of the dairy projectile. The giant cheese wheel struck and killed him. It's a tragic story, but also an unforgettable reminder that in the right circumstances, even a block of cheese can become a deadly weapon. 33. Sir Francis Bacon was a true Renaissance man, a philosopher, statesman, scientist, and the father of the scientific method. His mind was always working, always questioning. In the winter of 1626, while traveling through the snow, he was struck by a brilliant idea. Could snow be used to preserve meat, just like salt? This was the birth of the concept of frozen food. Eager to test his hypothesis immediately, he stopped his carriage, bought a chicken from a nearby village, and began stuffing it with snow with his bare hands. The experiment was a success for science, but a disaster for Bacon. He caught a severe chill from handling the snow, which quickly developed into a fatal case of pneumonia. He died a few days later, a martyr to his own scientific curiosity. He essentially invented the frozen chicken at the cost of his own life, proving that sometimes a revolutionary idea can give you a very literal cold shoulder. History proves one thing: you can live like a king and still die like a meme. So tell me, which of these ridiculous exits would you give to your least favorite person alive, and why? Go wild in the comments. And if you're into history that's weird, wrong, and somehow 100% true, hit like, smash subscribe, and prepare for more delicious disasters from the past.